Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, The 5 Most Common HR Compliance Gaps Putting Your Practice Profits at Risk. That is a super long title to tell you we're going to talk about the 5 most common HR mistakes that could risk you losing some money. And we don't want to be doing that right now in this economy. And that's why we have Ali here with us to tell us from the legal side what he's noticed as a lawyer, as an employment law lawyer. He's going to run through all of this with you and give you some tips, talk about why it's so important, and what are some easy solutions for you to use. So while we're going through the presentation today, please go ahead and submit your questions in the chat as you're thinking about them. I know for me, if I have to wait till the end, I will forget it. But if you send them in the chat, we will get to them at the end. And if we miss anything, we will follow up with you through an email. So with all of that really fun disclaimer stuff out of the way, I'm going to hand it over to Ali, who is going to make the law so much fun today. So enjoy, and here he is.
All right, thank you, Taylor. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I hope it's warm somewhere in this country because it is freezing here in the northern Bay Area. It is just so cold, but I hope it's warm where you are. So let's talk about HR kind of updates because as many of you know, we've been doing a lot of these kinds of webinars, pertaining to specific states and specific topics. We're going to do one today on the federal rules, and the 5 common HR compliance traps that we are seeing most of you as practice owners facing and falling victim to. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, and we're going to talk a little bit about the new laws as well and how to kind of deal with that. Now, why do we care? Well, we care because none of us can have a business without our team. I mean, that goes without saying. And so we need employees, we need strong team members. But what's really happening since COVID is that there is a serious push at the federal level and also at the state level, but really at the federal level to change the rules when it comes to compliance as far as HR is concerned. And so these new obligations are putting a lot of pressure on practices around the country. They're putting a lot of pressure on you to make sure that you're compliant and that you're doing it correctly. Every day I talk to doctors, unfortunately, who are getting letters from the state or from a lawyer or whatnot. And most of you are not getting these letters because you are intentionally doing things wrong. What's happening is that there is so much pressure on you for compliance from the state and from the federal government that it's just hard to keep track of. And as a result of that, these tic-tac violations that you go through are causing huge penalties. So unfortunately, the average settlement for a case these days is 1 to 2 times someone's annual salary. So if you're paying an employee, let's say $25 an hour, that's about $50,000 a year in salary. That means that if that person sues you for almost any of the topics we're going to talk about today, the settlement is just going to be between 50 and 100K, right? 50 and 100K, which is a lot. And you could use that money for marketing. You could use that money for new chairs. You could use that money for inventory. I mean, there's so much that you could do in your practice depending on what kind of practice you have. And this doesn't even include the legal fees. And so this is why we do this. This is why I am so passionate about this, why I feel like I do Zooms every day, is because I want to get the information out and I want to teach you how to be compliant and how we can minimize your chance of getting sued. I can't eliminate it, but I can minimize it. And if I can minimize it, what that means is that there's a higher chance of success if, God forbid, you do get a letter from the lawyer or from the state, okay? As most of you know, this is what I do. I'm a healthcare attorney. I work with dentists, optometrists, veterinarians, physicians, all across the country on practice transitions, HR, of course, estate planning, and some other things. And so I'm excited to be with you today. But feel free to ask questions, like as Taylor was saying. Do not kind of think about them and not put them down because you might forget later. So type them in and we'll try to answer them at the end. We're going to go for about a half an hour, 40 minutes or so, and keep it really tight and short, and then try to get as many questions as possible. All right, so here is compliance gap number one, right? So we're going to go over 5 of these. So it's the missing handbook. Okay, now I've been harping on this for years and years and years. The handbook is the beginning of compliance for you. It is low-lying fruit. If God forbid, you should get sued, the lawyers look for it. If you don't have one, it's an easier case for them, right? It's an easier case for them. So please get an employment handbook. Now, pre-COVID, you could get away with maybe a handbook once every couple of years. Even though laws change every year, you could get away with it if you didn't want to do it. Since COVID, you really cannot get away with it anymore. You really need to have an updated one every single year, because not only are state rules changing, but the federal rules are now changing as well, which we'll talk about in a bit, that are impacting everything that you do. And if you have policies that are out of date, if you have policies that are not compliant with one of these rules, or maybe on their face are wrong, that just exposes you to more and more liability, right? More and more liability. And so really important to get one, really important to get one done, quickly, that's customized to you. Now, if should you go to a lawyer to get one? You could, but you're going to spend $5,000 to $8,000 on that. There are some mom and pop organizations, really old time companies that create employment manuals for you, but that's all they do, right? That's all they do. They kind of pretend like they do other things, but all they're doing is preparing a manual. That really isn't sufficient. I mean, it's okay if you spend $4,000 or $5,000 on it, but it doesn't go far enough, right? It doesn't go far enough in terms of your protection, because the manual, the employment handbook, is just one of a lot of things that you need, which we'll talk about. But try not to do a template, right? Because templates are usually not made for doctors, right? The templates are usually meant for other businesses that may not have HIPAA, OSHA, other regulatory kind of responsibilities, and so you might be getting a bad one, especially if you get one from a payroll company. And then not having a handbook is by far the worst thing you could do, right? I'd rather you maybe handwrite it on a napkin than not have one at all. And so, and then not updating your handbook is the third problem. Now, the good news is that for those of you that are listening that are already HR for Health customers, you get a free handbook as part of your membership, and every year it gets updated for you, at no extra cost. Now, if the laws change, all that gets updated, no cost. If you decide to change some policy, you just contact our team and they help you with it, right? Nobody else can say that, and that's from day one until you sell your practice. And so it's a huge advantage. And the reason I did that is not because it was necessarily the smartest decision from a business perspective, right? A lot of people charge for employment handbooks. I did it because I didn't want any of you to have the excuse that you're not going to have a manual. Ali, it's too expensive. No, it's not. You get it for free as part of the membership. Like, there's no cost to it, right? So no additional cost. Like, it's pretty simple. Oh, I don't have time to update it. Don't worry. You don't need to update it. We are going to update it for you, right? And so we've made it as simple as possible. You fill out questionnaires, we customize them for you. Our team will hold your hand through it. So there's really, really no excuse. Now, why is it important, right? Why is it important? Well, there's a couple of things that can get you kind of started on it. One is, a lot of you have policies, whether you know it or not, a lot of you have policies, what time employees come, what time they go to lunch, what are they supposed to do if they're sick, what are they supposed to do, if they want to take a vacation or they get injured on the job. You have policies, but they may not be written in sort of an organized fashion. And so that's one of the ways we do this, is we start with making sure that you're taking all your policies and writing them down, right? The second thing is that we have an entire team of HR professionals and lawyers who are looking at your manual and making sure that you didn't put some provision in there, right, that is wrong, right? If you put a provision in there that has a problem in it or is, illegal, then they will make sure that's fixed. The third is electronic signatures. And this is one of the secret sauces that we have, right? One of the secret sauces. Now, the whole software and everything we do has a lot of back end stuff that nobody knows is happening that protects you as the practice owner, right? Electronic signatures is one of those, right? The employees have to review the manual and sign electronically with a date stamp that they read it and they signed it on this date. They can never go back and say that they didn't get it. Now, if somebody opens up the document and doesn't sign it, we know when they opened it, right? So again, they can't say they didn't get it or they didn't see it or whatnot. All of these things are things that we do on the back end that protects you legally. But the electronic signature is hugely important. And then finally, the annual law updates. That happens, and your manual gets updated all the time. So you don't have to worry about that either. Okay, hugely important. Let's assume you have a manual, okay, or you're going to get one. The second gap is, what do you do when you're recruiting or hiring or onboarding? Okay, because this is where a lot of the mistakes happen. Now, if you're like me and most practices around the country, you've had a hard time finding really good employees. Now, as an aside, the good news is what we're seeing data-wise is that it's getting easier, right? Some positions in offices are getting easier to hire for as the economy is slowing down. Not all, but some often, some positions it's becoming easier. So that's the good news. The bad news is that when we find somebody that's good, what do? We throw them in, right? We throw them into the fire, and we don't take the time to train them. We don't take the time to, give them the documents and let them kind of review them, sign them, all of those things. And so as a result of that, sometimes when we're sidestep these processes because we're so excited that we found somebody good and we need somebody so good in the back or in the front, we forget all this. So one of the things I always say, and I know it's not always easy to do, but if you take a moment, it's really an important part of HR compliance, is just take the time and treat your new employee like you would treat a new patient, right? Like you would treat a new patient. Show them around the office, walk them around. If you have a new CAD CAM machine, show them that. If you have some new technology, show them that. If you redesign something, talk to them about that, right? Show them the sterilization room if you've got, the lights and all the kind of cool stuff. Walk them around, right? Show them the office, impress them. And then, what's really cool about that, right? What's really cool about that as an employee, when you start to see that, you see that the office really cares about these little things. And when they feel that you care about these little things, then they tend to care more as well, right? They tend to take more care with what they do in their work. And so once you've done that, and you give them a job description, which we have thousands of them. And so you can customize yours, but you start off with a really, really good one from us. Then you give them the new hire checklist. Now, this area is where a lot of you, if you are not HR for Health customers, you got to know about this, right? So there are anywhere from 12 to 20 some documents that you need to have for each and every employee, depending on the state that you're in. So really important that you go and check your employee files. If you only have 2, 3, 4 documents, right? You probably have some of the, payroll documents from the federal government that the, payroll company gave you. You don't have all of them, then you need to contact us so we can give them to you, because it's really important that you get all the legal documents in your state. Because again, it's all about protection, right? It's all about protection. Some easy things like something called a likeness release, where you can take photos of your employees and post them online and stuff. That's a really important document to have signed by everyone, because if the employee leaves, you don't want them to call back and say, hey, take my picture of all social media, all websites, all everything. The website's probably not as big of a deal, but taking it off social media will definitely impact your SEO and your reach, and also the look and feel. So it's like these little things that make a big difference, right? And so make sure you have these 12 to 20 required documents And then there's, of course, a lot more that we highly recommend, but at least you have those, right? Applicant screening and interviewing, really important that you do this. I always recommend, protect yourself, right? Call their references. If they give you references of 3 people, and hopefully they're former employers or something. Instead of calling the phone number that's on there, Google that doctor's name, find them, and call the office and then ask to speak. Doctors will take other doctors' calls. Of course, and then you can ask them about this employee. The reason I say this is that sometimes prospective employees will put a doctor's name that they work for, but then they'll put someone else's phone number, right? They'll put like their friend's phone number or their relative's phone number. And so you want to just kind of Google their name and contact them. So again, really important. Some states allow you to do background checks after you've made an offer of employment. So just check on that. We think it's a good idea. You don't need to do a deep background check, right? You don't need to know who they dated in high school and college or where they lived. Like, you don't need any of that. You basically just need to know a basic background check. Do they have a criminal record? Are they in any, sort of lawsuit or criminal proceeding or civil proceeding that might be important for you? You guys handle a lot of money, a lot of sensitive information, people's personal identifiable information, and so a lot of that needs to be protected, and so it's important to do that, for every employee. Having a standardized onboarding process is an easy way of simplifying this so that you don't get in trouble. So make sure that you have a process. Maybe on their first day they come in, you're giving them all their required documents. Ideally, if you're on HR for Health, you'll email them all that stuff beforehand so they have it all ready, before they come in, and then they come in that day and there's maybe minimal work that they have to do in the office, which allows you to get them back, working on patients sooner. And again, standardizing your forms, knowing which documents to provide and which documents you don't need to provide is a huge thing, All right. Next thing is compliance gap number 3, which is wage and hour, overtime, and non-compliance. So this is probably the biggest area of liability when it comes to doctors, right? And so it's really important that you kind of focus on this. So what are we talking about in terms of timekeeping? Well, what's really important is that you got to make sure you're following the federal rules regarding breaks. They have to be paid. In some states it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, just depends on your state. But make sure, right? Make sure you are paying for their rest breaks. And then most states have a lunch break involved, and so that's at least 30 minutes. So the lunch breaks are not paid, and so that's a good thing. But make sure if your state requires it, that you give them lunch. Some states like Iowa and others follow the federal rules, which means you don't have to give lunch, but most offices, of course, do provide a lunch break. And so in that situation, make sure it's in your manual and make sure they take it. Okay, so hugely important. So every state has a little bit slightly different rule, but again, make sure you do that. If you close your office for lunch, meaning no patient can walk in, no patient is seen by the staff, nothing like that, it's great to block out lunch on the schedule. If you're open during lunch, then what I would do is I would block it out for each employee so that you're not leaving it to them to decide when to take lunch, but you're telling them, I want you to take lunch here, here, here. This way, you're ensuring that everyone's taking their lunch, because I guarantee you, people will come back later and say, oh my gosh, the office is so busy and I was so busy and I could never take lunch and we could never take lunch. And so it's like all these sob stories, and we usually are very successful in defending against them, but it would be a lot easier if you blocked out the schedule. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. Now remember, all non-exempt employees, should be getting their lunches, their breaks, and then of course overtime. Now, what does it mean to be non-exempt? So a non-exempt employee is basically every employee in your office, except maybe a doctor associate. Okay, a doctor associate, if they're paid a salary and fit some other categories, and an office manager. An office manager could be exempt in many situations if the office manager is managing it, two or more people. They're being paid a salary, double minimum wage, and some other things. And so, if you have ever any questions about whether someone's exempt or non-exempt, just reach out to me or HR for Health, and we'll just coach you through it. But if you don't want to reach out and you're like debating, err on the side of caution and make them non-exempt, because that's always safer. You'll never go wrong if you put someone down as a non-exempt. But if you put down someone as exempt and they're not, then that could be a problem, right? That could be a problem. So for those of you who, the common mistake I see is for those of you who are paying, let's say, an associate a per diem rate, maybe it's, $500, $600, $700 a day, and you make them exempt. That's technically not an exempt employee because they need to be paid either a yearly or monthly salary. And so it's like those little rules that kind of can trip you up, and very, very important. The other thing that we are seeing a lot of very recently is non-discretionary bonuses. If you are giving non-discretionary bonuses to your employees, make sure that's included in their regular rate of pay and whatnot. It's very important that be included. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. If it's a discretionary bonus, you don't have to pay it, and so on and so forth. Totally different story. But a lot of you hired consultants to help you, and sometimes they put in bonus plans, but they don't really think through the bonus plans when it comes to HR. So again, that can trip you up, and I do not want you to get tripped up on something like that, because you're trying to do something good, right? You're trying to do something good and give people bonuses, and then it comes back and catches you red-handed. So just be careful about that. So math is really where things get kind of messed up. Unlike me, I'm sure most of you are really good at math, and maybe one of the reasons why you went into the sciences. But it's really important that you have a compliant time clock system. Please do not use your practice management software, for time clock. They're not, they sort of throw that in there because they feel like they have to have it, but it's not really their business. Their business, the practice management softwares, are meant to be for patient data and communication, not for HR tracking and things of that nature. So their time clocks really don't go all the way. The second thing is, if you're using any biometric type stuff, right? Where they're scanning the retina, or it's like fingerprints or all of that stuff, it's important to start to move away from that. I know it's more advanced than just your simple username and password, but we have seen some legislation against this popping up around the country because there's been a fear of abuses of that data, right? If somebody has your cornea information, your fingerprint information, there's a lot of things they could potentially do with it. And I think one of the companies even had a data breach where that information is now in the ether. And so it's there's laws now being passed to protect against that. So just go back to the simple, username, password, logins, stuff, and like we have at HR for Health. And you can have, two-step security. You can have all that stuff if you want, but try to stay away from the biometric things, as those are, really, really, kind of crazy. So we kind of talked about this. Make sure the breaks and overtime stuff is being paid correctly. You're giving lunches. Use an electronic time system. Again, hugely important. If people are asking for vacation time off, PTO, things of that nature, just document all of it, right? Document all of it, and make sure you have a system that allows you to do that. Okay, all right. Gap number 4. Here are some policies that we see some of our clients have that might get you in trouble. Okay, so let's kind of talk about this a little bit in detail. Again, this might be a little bit different state to state, but these are, nationwide, the things that we see the most complaints about when we get letters from lawyers or the state. So one is the final paycheck requirement. Okay, the final paycheck requirement. So there are, depending on your state, you can either, if you fire somebody, some states you have to give the check right then and there, which if you're in one of those states, I recommend you cut it, prepare all the paperwork before you fire someone, and then give it to them before they leave. Make them sign that they have received the check and whatnot. You never want to fire someone emotionally, right? Like, oh, I'm just so mad, I'm going to fire you, because you just don't have time to prepare everything. If you have to, if you're upset at someone and you really want to let them go, send them home, right? Send them home, and then prepare the paperwork and let them go the next day, or let them go that same day. But at least you have time to send, to do it. So some states do that. Some states allow you a few days to send the final paycheck. So sometimes it's like a week or whatnot. So you could do that. And then some allow you even longer. You can do it, at the next pay period. And so that's good, right? That's good. You could potentially have some extra time there, but making sure you're following your state's rules is really important. I was talking to a doctor actually at a seminar that I did earlier this week, and it was a study group. It was a big study group, and the doctor said, "Look, I issued the check. I Googled it, what my responsibilities were, and I thought I was good. And then I got a letter from the state about 45 days later saying I owed all these penalties and whatnot." Well, he had tried to do things right, right? He had tried to, figure out what the rules were. But when he Googled it, he didn't realize that the site that was giving him information, that apparently was a legitimate site, was giving him information about a different state rules. But he read it as the gospel because it was, from a law firm site, and it looked real and it looked okay. But it was in a different state. And so you just have to be careful. I know it sounds silly because you're like, oh, well, of course I would make sure it's in the right state. Well, it's not always so easy to figure out whether they're talking about the federal rules or they're talking about the state rules. So just kind of be careful. If you ever have any questions about, terminating someone and you're just not sure, just pick up the phone and call me here at the office. You'll have my info at the end. I'm happy, or my team is happy, to talk to you and just coach you through it, right? Just coach you through it for a few minutes and and then you can kind of go from there, right? So again, hugely important. Make sure your PTO, pay time off, vacation is included. Many states require that that information to be paid out. So hugely important to do that. Excuse me. All right, risky procedures, terminations, always risky. Always risky. So important to have good documentation. Most states are at will, right? Are at will, so you can fire someone if you have to fire someone. Um, you don't have to have for cause or whatnot, but in most situations, at will isn't really at will, right? There are some protected classes and stuff that you need to sort of deal with, and so it's really important that you're careful about who you terminate, right? Who you terminate, and if you do it, then just be smart about how you do it and when, and then you should be okay. You should be okay. Otherwise, it could really be risky for you. And so just kind of keep that in mind. I think terminations are where most of the problems start and end. And so what I always say is, if it's a risky termination, just give us a call. So just kind of keep that in mind. Again, at will, doesn't mean you can terminate anyone at any point. It just means you just have to be a little bit more careful. Now, there are 3 times when you should not terminate someone, and that is if they're, pregnant, if they're injured, or if they're older. I can go, I've written a lot of material about this, so you can find it on our websites and whatnot. You can find videos, I'm sure, about this as well. But just kind of keep that in mind as you're sort of, terminating someone. If they're in any sort of risky position, again, just pick up the phone, call me at the law firm, or call HR for help, and we will coach you through that scenario, right? Coach you through that scenario. Remember, my goal today is not to make you HR experts, right? That's impossible. But what you can do is you can learn when to raise your hand and ask for help, right? If you know when something's super risky and you ask for help, that's a huge win, huge win. And so just kind of keep that in mind, and just call us whenever you need something. Okay, the last compliance gap, not staying up to date on evolving laws. So tons of new laws coming up as we talked about. So we're going to go through some of these. I don't have to say it again. Federal law changes, state law changes are happening all the time now. Definitely in January, but sometimes in July and other times during the year. So you guys know why it's important. I'm going to go through a couple of these, more important ones. One is called the Stericycle ruling. The National Labor Relations Board, which really governs unions, has its own rules, right? Has a lot of its own rules. Now you might say, Ali, I'm not in a union. My employees are not in a union. Why does this apply to me? It applies to you because regardless of whether you have employees in a union or not, these rules apply to you. And the Stericycle ruling has changed some rules that were in effect for the last 10, 15 years, and basically has made it so that you as the employer now have additional liabilities if any of your policies at all, in some way restrict an employee's right to speak to one another, to form, a group, to use any rights that they may have under federal or state law. So basically, anything that you put in place that could restrict a fundamental right that an employee has under the federal rules could be a violation. Okay, now, what are some of these rules, right? What are some of these? The most common ones that people violate are the right to speak about one's wages, right? So a lot of times our doctors have policies in their manuals that say you cannot talk to your coworker about your salary and benefits. That's totally illegal. You can't have that, right? Another one might be something like, you can't go out on maternity leave. You have to, basically get permission or whatnot. Again, totally wrong. Like you can't do that. Or you will not be paid overtime unless it is approved. Totally wrong, right? Like you must be paid overtime regardless of it. These are the kinds of things that we keep seeing. So just be careful about that. The I-9 is the immigration document that has been updated as of November. If you've hired any new employees, you need to make sure you provide that new I-9 to your team. So just kind of keep that in mind. Again, super simple to do, but you need to give that to them. The Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act, that's the next thing that's been passed. Now, what the federal government did with this is they came in and they said, the rules are not uniform around the country, and we want the rules to be uniform, or at least create a baseline for some pregnant employees. And so they added a ton of extra rules that were never present before regarding what employers needed to do for compliance if they have a pregnant employee. This includes accommodations, what happens if they're expressing milk, how much time off do they get, what constitutes, a disability in terms of additional time off. So all of these things are now rules. Now, the good news is that some states, like California and others, already have really, really strict pregnancy laws. So if you're in one of those states, your rules in California, for example, or in your state apply, right? Because they're stricter, they're more broad than the federal ones in many ways. If you're in a state that doesn't have a lot of rules regarding pregnancy leave, then you got to follow the federal rules. Now, what makes it complicated, and this is where HR for Health helps, is that you got to read kind of the rules line by line or section by section. And if the federal rule is more restrictive than the California rule, then the federal rule applies. If the California rule, for example, in your state, is more restrictive than the federal rule, then that rule applies. So you have to piecemeal the rules. And so depending on your state, the different rules inside the law, some may be state, specific that apply, and some may be maybe federal specific that apply with regard to this. So again, really can be really complicated, but our employment manual and all of our process makes it really, really easy for you. mandated sick leave. More and more states are passing mandated sick leave. Some states are increasing sick leave for their employees, and so just kind of keep that in mind. Again, some states brand new, they're adding sick leave. They've never had it before. Some states, again, like California, shocker, is leading the case, has a massive amount of sick leave, and they've increased it even more. And so just kind of keep that in mind. There is a difference between sick leave and paid time off. And so if you prefer paid time off, make sure your paid time off policies follow all of the sick leave policies. You can't make them less. So just kind of keep that in mind. Your policies need to be written really carefully to abide by your state's rules. And some states, the city and the county have their own rules on top of the states that's more restrictive. So in those scenarios, you have to abide by those rules. So just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, keep that in mind. If you don't like PTO, paid time off, and you'd rather have sick leave and vacation, that's totally okay. A lot of people do that. Just make sure you have separate policies, in your manual for both. It's important to have two. Don't combine them. And the reason is that you can basically do whatever you want on the vacation side, whereas the sick leave side has to follow the rule of your state. Okay. Okay. As we end, make sure to talk to one of our team members at HR for Health. If you're not an HR for Health customer yet, see if it's a good fit for your practice. They do a lot of work. There's a lot of value there. They work really hard to make sure you're compliant. They know that it's of utmost importance to protect you so that you can keep growing your practice, keeping your family safe. And so they go above and beyond what they have to do to make sure you are totally protected. And I can tell you as a lawyer who defends so many doctors in front of these hearings, that although we can't prevent you from being sued, when you have data, when you have documents signed, when you have time clock records that are great and strong, when you have the employees on the scheduler that HR for Health has, it allows the cases to be rectified really quickly, right? Either there's an easy, small settlement, or the cases just go away and they get dismissed. And so that's the perk of having this. It's like the best insurance you can have without having to pay for insurance, because you get so many other perks. So please talk to our team, let them kind of wow you and impress you. And if they don't, let me know, because they'll be in trouble. All right, here's a QR code for those of you that are interested. Feel free to scan that if you want to talk to someone. Again, there's no pressure. They will just show you the software, talk to you about your office, coach you through some things maybe that you can fix immediately, and then and see if it's a good fit. Okay. All right, Taylor, do we have any questions coming in?
I don't see any. In case you all were, oh wait, someone said yes. So go ahead and start typing in the chat room and we will answer some questions. Let's wait for any to come in.
Sounds good. I know there was a lot of information. There's a lot of information. So
everyone is learning that they don't want to be a lawyer today.
And for those of you who are listening, if you think of questions or you go back to your offices, make sure, most of you probably have my info. If you don't, email, us at hello@HR4Health, and somebody will get back to you. If you want to talk to me personally, just let them know and they'll send you to me, and I'm happy to chat with anyone. So perfect.
I don't see any additional questions. Oh, here we go. If you have a temp employee in California, do you have to deduct taxes?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So this applies actually not just California, this applies all over the country. If you have a temp employee or you have any employee, you absolutely need to deduct taxes from their paycheck. The only exception is if you are hiring someone or not hiring someone, but if you have like someone coming in for a working interview for like one day, and you can cut them a check that day, which is what we would recommend. Have them fill out an I-9 and a W-4, and you can cut them a check, and that's it. You're done. Then if they come back and you hire them full time, part time, then you got to put take out taxes and do all of that. But any temp employee, any part-time employees, any employee at all, taxes should absolutely be taken out. Now, one thing we didn't talk about today, but that has been passed at the federal level is this rule where there's dual employment status around the country now. What that basically means is that if you're a doctor and you own your practice, of course you're responsible for your employees. Now, if you are a office manager who also has responsibilities for employees, you could be deemed also responsible from an HR perspective if there's violations, which is really crazy. And the reason is they want more accountability. They want more people to be interested in ensuring that the office is compliant. Now, where does this impact you as a practice owner? Well, as a practice owner, what we are seeing is if you're hiring temp employees from temp agencies, if you're doing anything of that nature, you just have to be careful that you're not, that temp agency is actually paying them, because many of you will pay the temp agency and then the temp agency will pay the employee. But sometimes they short them on their income. They don't pay them overtime. They don't pay them all those things, and that responsibility could end up falling on you as well. So just kind of be careful about all of that because it's hugely important.
I don't see any additional
Okay,
questions yet, but I want to ask you one. You had
sure.
mentioned that with terminations, there were a couple groups of people that we should really be careful about. And I want to ask, why do we have protected classes when it comes to just HR in general? And why are they so important to think about in a lot of decision making, but in terminations
hmm
specifically?
Sure. So the reason why we have protected classes is because historically, as a country, there are um, there are many people who have been disadvantaged over the course of our history with regard to employment laws. Going back to like the Industrial Revolution, for you history buffs, there were moments where there was no worker safety, there was no limitations on hours worked, and so it's very easy to, as an employer, to put your influence on employees. Now, many of you are not doing this, right? Many of you are not abusing your employees. Many of you are not, overworking them. There's no child labor in healthcare. So it's usually not that problem. But unfortunately, what happens is that because the HR rules are meant for the biggest, businesses out there, 90% of all HR rules that apply to you as a small business owner also apply to the Fortune 1000, right? And so because we're trying to protect against those bad actors, a lot of this kind of rolls down the hill and falls on our tables as small business owners. But that's why things like HR for Health help, because it sort of evens the playing field. Instead of having to hire people with masters in HR, you have a software that does it all for you, and you just have to maintain it. So it's that's the reason, Taylor.
That's a great answer to that. And you made it so digestible. I love it.
Cool.
We have Christine who asked a great question. And she asked, in California, are we required to pay out sick leave when an employee is terminated?
Yeah, you are not. You are not. So, and again, this is a really good question because this applies really almost across the country. Sick leave is not a paid benefit at the time of termination. So if someone gets terminated and they haven't used their sick leave, you definitely do not have to pay them out. Now, that being said, if you have PTO and you don't have sick leave, you do have to pay out PTO because remember, PTO is combining vacation and sick leave. And if you have vacation, you have to pay that out, but you definitely do not have to pay out sick.
I don't know why they had to make that so confusing. That's a good answer, though.
Believe you me, I know. You should have seen the rules that the states tried to pass this last time, and so many groups, large employment groups, and state associations fought against it. But yeah, it's their job to make it hard. So,
Oof. Let's see. Someone asked, sometimes employees put in each other's passwords to get more hours. How do you avoid that?
you fire them. You fire them. You fire them. So yeah, if people are using each other's passwords to log in, that is theft. Okay, that is theft. Now, it may not seem like theft, right? Because it's not physical dollars, but it is in a way, correct? Because you're paying more in salaries and payroll and all of that. So, what I would do is I would give one warning, and if that happens, just fire them. Because here's what you have to remember, right? And this is just sort of a lesson that I always stick by. Liars will always be liars. Thieves will always be thieves, right? If they're stealing from you by doing something silly like that, the next thing they're going to do is they're going to steal something more, right? And it could be checks, cash, it could be so many other things. And so, people don't change unless they're children. Children, you can, change as they grow up, but adults don't change. And so just be careful. I would say document and then terminate immediately, because there's bigger problems coming down the pipe for you if you
Mm,
if you do that. So
wow, that was a really tough one. Thank
I
you
know,
for
I hate
answering.
those. I know those are always tough for employees, because you just kind of never know, right? You just kind of never know, what the intent is, but it's just such a silly thing. That's why I give them one chance, right? You just give them
Mhm.
one opportunity, and if they fix it, great. If they don't, that's it. So
I like that you didn't sugarcoat it either. It is
yeah,
theft, even though it seems like a really scary word, it's true, and
it's
we
true.
should be thinking about it that way.
100%.
I think
Cool.
that is it for today. So thank you everyone for your time. I'm going to follow up with all of you through an email with the slide deck and the helpful links that we listed today, so you can have it easy and you can download it and review what we talked about today in case a lot of it was overwhelming or maybe you just forgot. And then you can email us later with any additional questions that you may have. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Ali, for your time, and I'm
Thank
excited
you,
to hear from
everyone.
you all soon.
Taylor,
Bye.
thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.